May 28th, 1940, 4 p.m. Winston Churchill had 3 hours before his own government voted to surrender to Hitler. Not after losing battles, before firing a shot. 25 men he barely knew were his only chance. No notes, no plan, just words. This is the speech that saved democracy, and he almost didn't give it. Deep beneath the streets, in a concrete bunker called the Cabinet War Rooms, Winston Churchill sat alone. He'd been Prime Minister for exactly 18 days. In those 18 days, France had fallen. The British Army was trapped on a beach at Dunkirk. Hitler's forces stood at Calais, just 21 miles across the Channel. Invasion wasn't imminent, not yet, but Britain faced starvation, blockade, and total isolation. And now, Churchill's own government was about to vote to surrender, not on a battlefield, not after bombs fell or soldiers died. In this room, with a show of hands, the vote would happen in 3 hours. Churchill knew he was going to lose. His Foreign Secretary, Lord Halifax, had spent the entire day building support for peace negotiations with Hitler. Halifax was tall, aristocratic, reasonable, everything Churchill wasn't. Halifax's argument was simple. Britain was finished. Why sacrifice more lives? Negotiate through Mussolini. Save what could be saved. Chamberlain, the former Prime Minister, seemed sympathetic. Churchill needed the wavering members to hold firm. In a parliamentary system, if Halifax won this argument, Churchill was done. But here's what nobody knew yet. In 3 hours, Churchill would deliver a speech with no notes, no prepared remarks, just words. And those words would change everything. 25 junior ministers would stand and cheer. Halifax's peace faction would collapse. Britain would fight on. But standing there at 4 o'clock, Churchill didn't know that yet. All he knew was this. His entire life had been a preparation for this moment, and he was about to fail. He was 65 years old, a political outcast for 10 years. For a decade, he'd warned about Hitler while everyone pursued peace. Now they were about to prove him wrong one final time. He walked to the map on the wall. Red pins showed German positions. They covered almost everything: France, Belgium, Holland, Norway. Just one island remained. His island. Churchill had always believed in destiny, that some men were born for specific moments in history. He'd waited his entire life for this, and in 3 hours, it would be over. He reached for his glass of whiskey. His hands shook slightly, not from fear, from exhaustion. He hadn't slept in 2 days. The door opened. His private secretary, John Colville, entered. "Sir, the outer cabinet is assembling." Churchill nodded. He took a long drink. Then he set down the glass. "Let's go see if words can beat tanks." He walked toward the door, toward the speech that would save Britain, or end it. But to understand what happened in that room, you need to know who Winston Churchill really was. And that story begins much earlier. In failure, in darkness, in the wilderness. 10 years earlier, 1929, Winston Churchill lost everything. His political party rejected him. His colleagues abandoned him. The Prime Minister called him dangerous and unstable. At 54 years old, his career was over. He retreated to his country estate, Chartwell, a sprawling house in Kent with gardens, ponds, and too many rooms for a man who spent most of his time alone. He painted, landscapes mostly, serene countryside scenes that looked nothing like the darkness in his mind. Churchill called it the black dog, his depression. It had haunted him since childhood. Some days he couldn't get out of bed. Other days he worked 18 hours straight, fueled by whiskey and cigars, trying to outrun the emptiness. His wife Clementine watched him struggle. She wrote him letters, even though they lived in the same house. Brutal, honest letters. "You are difficult to work with," she wrote once. "Your rudeness to staff is inexcusable. You must control your temper." He kept every letter. He called her cat. She called him pig. It was the only honest relationship in his life. By 1933, Churchill had become a joke in Parliament. He stood up and warned about Adolf Hitler, about German rearmament, about the threat to Europe. Nobody listened. The policy was appeasement. Give Hitler what he wants. Avoid another war. Peace in our time. Churchill was the crazy old man screaming about danger while everyone else pursued peace. Alarmist, they called him. Warmonger. Yesterday's man. King Edward VIII abdicated to marry an American divorcee. Churchill supported the king, defended him in Parliament. The entire House of Commons shouted him down, literally shouted until he couldn't continue speaking. He walked out, humiliated. His own party considered him finished. But Churchill kept warning about Hitler. Germany annexed Austria. Churchill warned. Germany took Czechoslovakia. Churchill warned. September 1939. Germany invaded Poland. Britain declared war. Churchill was right. And suddenly, everyone remembered. Prime Minister Chamberlain brought Churchill back into government, made him First Lord of the Admiralty, in charge of the Royal Navy. The Navy sent a signal to every ship in the fleet. 3 words, Winston is back. But 8 months later, everything went wrong. Germany invaded Norway. The British tried to stop them. The operation failed catastrophically. Churchill was in charge of the operation. It was his failure, his disaster. Parliament demanded answers, demanded resignation. The government was collapsing. May 10th, 1940, 6 o'clock in the evening. Chamberlain resigned. Someone had to become Prime Minister. King George VI preferred Lord Halifax, thought Churchill was too unpredictable. But Halifax refused the job, said he couldn't lead from the House of Lords. It was partly constitutional, partly fear of presiding over Britain's inevitable defeat. And here's what nobody tells you about that refusal. Halifax knew what was coming. He'd already had quiet conversations with cabinet members about negotiation, about peace. Halifax was planning his move, so Churchill got the job, by default, because nobody else wanted to captain a sinking ship. That same day, Germany invaded France, Belgium, and Holland. Churchill's first day as Prime Minister was the day the Nazi war machine rolled across Western Europe. 3 days later, May 13th, he addressed Parliament for the first time as Prime Minister. I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. It wasn't inspiring. It was grim, honest, brutal. Some members of Parliament appreciated the honesty. Others thought he was confirming their worst fears. The newspapers were mixed. Some praised his resolve. Others questioned whether he was the right man for the crisis. Within 2 weeks, France was collapsing. The British Expeditionary Force was trapped at Dunkirk, 400,000 men surrounded by German tanks. And Churchill's Foreign Secretary, Lord Halifax, was having private conversations about peace, about negotiation, about surrender. May 26th. Halifax formally proposed that Britain explore peace terms through Mussolini. The War Cabinet met. Halifax argued for negotiation. Chamberlain seemed open to the idea. Churchill argued for fighting on. The meetings continued for 3 days, May 26th, 27th, 28th. Behind closed doors, the fate of Britain was being decided, and Churchill was losing the argument, which brings us back to that underground bunker. May 28th, 1940, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 hours until the moment that would determine everything. Lord Halifax was 6 feet 5 inches tall. He wore a prosthetic left hand, born with a withered arm. The fake hand was always gloved. He was everything Churchill wasn't. Educated at Eton and Oxford, aristocratic, calm, reasonable, and he believed Britain had lost. Halifax wasn't a coward. He was a realist. He believed negotiation was duty, not betrayal, that saving British lives mattered more than stubborn defiance. The War Cabinet met in the underground bunker, 5 men around a table. Churchill, Halifax, Chamberlain, 2 others who stayed quiet. Halifax spoke first. Gentlemen, we must face reality. France will fall within days. Our army is trapped at Dunkirk. We have no allies. America won't help us. He paused. Let the facts settle. If we approach Mussolini now, we can negotiate from a position of relative strength. Wait another month, and we'll have nothing to bargain with. Chamberlain nodded. He'd built his career on appeasement. on avoiding war. This felt like vindication. Winston, you must see the logic. We're not surrendering. We're exploring terms. If Hitler's demands are unreasonable, we can reject them. Churchill lit a cigar, took a long draw. And if we start negotiating, when do we stop? Hitler will demand our fleet, our air force, our independence. And at each demand, Halifax will say it's reasonable. Halifax's voice stayed calm. Better to lose our fleet than our entire nation. The argument continued for hours. Halifax had the support. Chamberlain leaned his way. The two quiet ministers would follow Chamberlain's lead. Churchill was isolated. At 11 o'clock that morning, Halifax played his final card. Prime Minister, if you insist on continuing this futile war, I cannot remain in government. I will resign. It was a threat, and everyone in the room knew what it meant. If Halifax resigned, he'd take his supporters with him. The government would collapse. Churchill would fall. A new prime minister would be chosen, one who supported peace negotiations. Churchill had been prime minister for 18 days. He'd lose power without fighting a single major battle. He looked at Halifax, then at Chamberlain, then at the two men who wouldn't meet his eyes. Gentlemen, we will adjourn. I need to consult with the outer cabinet. Halifax frowned. The outer cabinet was 25 junior ministers. They had no formal power in this decision. That's highly irregular. Churchill stood. So is surrendering to Hitler. He walked out of the room. John Colville, his 25-year-old private secretary, was waiting outside. Colville had kept a diary. Every day, every conversation, uncensored observations of Churchill. In his diary that morning, he'd written something brutal. The PM is exhausted, drinking heavily. I fear he may not have the strength for what's coming. But now, watching Churchill walk toward the outer cabinet room, Colville saw something different. Determination. The outer cabinet assembled at 4 o'clock. 25 men. Most of them barely knew Churchill. They'd heard the rumors, the drinking, the depression, the instability. Churchill entered the room. No notes, no prepared remarks. He stood at the head of the table, started speaking. Gentlemen, Lord Halifax believes we should negotiate with Hitler, that we should explore peace terms through Mussolini. He paused. I will not do it. I will not negotiate. I will not surrender. His voice grew stronger. I have thought carefully about this matter. I am convinced that every man of you would rise up and tear me down from my place if I were for one moment to contemplate parley or surrender. Another pause. If this Long Island story of ours is to end at last, let it end only when each of us lies choking in his own blood upon the ground. Silence. Then one minister stood, started clapping. Another stood, then another. Within seconds, all 25 men were on their feet, applauding, some with tears in their eyes. Churchill had his answer. He walked back to the War Cabinet room. Halifax was waiting. Well, what did your junior ministers say? Churchill sat down. They will not accept peace negotiations. Not now. Not ever. We fight on. Halifax stared at him, realized he'd lost. Chamberlain looked at the table, said nothing. The vote never happened. Halifax didn't resign, couldn't resign now. The entire government knew where the junior ministers stood. Britain would fight on, because of words. But Churchill knew something else, something none of them had said out loud. The army was still trapped at Dunkirk, surrounded, cut off. 400,000 men about to be captured or killed. If they didn't get those soldiers home, Halifax would be right. Britain would have lost without negotiating. May 26, 1940, Operation Dynamo began. The mission was simple, impossible, but simple. Evacuate 400,000 British soldiers from a beach in France while the German army closed in. The Royal Navy didn't have enough ships. The beaches were too shallow for large vessels. German planes controlled the skies. Military analysts predicted they might save 30,000 men. Maybe. The rest would die or be captured. Churchill knew what that meant. Britain's entire professional army, gone. Then something unexpected happened. Civilian boats answered the call. Fishing trawlers, pleasure yachts, ferries, lifeboats. Hundreds of vessels crossed the English Channel, sailed into hell, started pulling soldiers off the beaches. For 9 days, the evacuation continued. German bombers attacked constantly. Ships sank, men drowned, but the boats kept coming. June 4th, 1940, Operation Dynamo ended. 338,000 soldiers rescued. Against all odds, Churchill gave voice to British resistance, but he didn't fight alone. Pilots, soldiers, factory workers, fishermen with small boats, millions held the line, but they'd left everything behind: tanks, artillery, rifles, ammunition. The British Army was safe, but it was unarmed. That afternoon, Churchill addressed Parliament. "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender." The speech became legendary, iconic, the most famous speech of the war. But here's what most people don't know. Churchill delivered it in Parliament that day. He was exhausted. His delivery was strained. Later, he re-recorded portions for radio broadcast. That's the version history remembers, the polished recording, not the exhausted man in Parliament. The myth of Churchill was becoming more powerful than the man, and Britain desperately needed the myth. June 22nd, France surrendered, signed an armistice with Germany. Britain stood alone. Hitler controlled all of Western Europe. From Norway to Spain, from the Atlantic to Poland, one island remained free. Churchill worked 18-hour days, lived in the cabinet war rooms, slept in a small bedroom underground. Every morning, Colville brought him breakfast in bed, champagne, whiskey, cigars. Work began before he was dressed. He took 2-hour baths, did his best thinking in the bathtub, dictated memos while soaking. His staff learned to enter the bathroom without knocking. Churchill didn't care. The British Empire was not built by men who were afraid of seeing their prime minister naked, he'd say. But privately, the black dog was circling. Clementine saw it. The moments when his hands shook, when his eyes went distant, when he couldn't speak. She'd sit with him, not saying anything, just present. Then he'd light another cigar, pour another drink, get back to work. September 7th, 1940, 8 o'clock in the evening. German bombers appeared over London. 300 aircraft. They dropped bombs for hours. The Blitz had begun. For 57 consecutive nights, German bombers attacked London. Every single night. Over 20,000 Londoners died. Across Britain, more than 40,000 civilians would die before the bombing ended. Churchill visited the bombed neighborhoods every day, walked through rubble, talked to survivors. People would recognize him, gather around, touch his coat. "Are we going to win, Mr. Churchill?" "Yes," he'd say. "We're going to win." He didn't know if it was true, but he said it anyway. The photographs showed him smiling, cigar in mouth, giving the V for victory sign. The cameras never showed what happened after. When he'd return to the bunker, pour a drink, sit in silence. One night, Colville found him crying. "So many dead," Churchill said. "So many." Then he dried his eyes, stood up, went back to work. December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. Japan attacked America. Germany declared war on the United States. Churchill wept, but this time, the tears were relief. "We have won the war," he told Colville that night. Colville was confused. America had just been attacked. How was that winning? Churchill explained. "Hitler has awakened a sleeping giant. America's industrial might will crush him. It will take years. Many will die. But the outcome is no longer in doubt. He'd held on long enough. Britain would survive. The voice of resistance had kept democracy alive until America could join the fight." But Churchill was about to discover something brutal. Saving democracy doesn't mean democracy loves you back. May 8th, 1945. Victory in Europe. Churchill stood on the balcony of the Ministry of Health. Thousands of people filled the streets below. They cheered, sang, waved flags, chanted his name, the man who saved Britain, the voice that held democracy together when everything else failed. 2 months later, July 26th, 1945, Churchill was at the Potsdam Conference, negotiating the peace with Stalin and Truman. The election results came in. He lost. The British people voted him out, gave the government to Clement Attlee and the Labour Party. His wife tried to console him. It may well be a blessing in disguise. Churchill looked at her. At the moment, it seems quite effectively disguised. The man who saved democracy was defeated by democracy. He returned to Chartwell, to his paintings, to his black dog. He became Prime Minister again in 1951, served until 1955. But those years were different, quieter. January 24th, 1965, Churchill died, 90 years old. Britain gave him a state funeral, the largest in history. Representatives from 112 nations attended. His coffin traveled by boat up the Thames. Cranes along the river dipped their jibs in salute. 350 million people watched on television worldwide. The man who fought with words was gone. But here's the question nobody asks. Was Churchill a great man? Or just the right man for one terrible moment? He was a racist. Believed in British racial superiority. When famine struck Bengal in 1943, he did little to help. Estimates say 2 to 3 million Indians died. Churchill's policies, his indifference, both contributed. He ordered the strategic bombing of German cities. Tens of thousands of civilians killed. He was an alcoholic, depressive, difficult, stubborn. For Britain, he was a savior. For millions in the British Empire, he was an oppressor. Both things are true. But in May 1940, when his own government wanted to surrender, he said no. One word, one vote, one speech. Democracy survived because a flawed man refused to accept logic. That cabinet war room still exists. You can visit it, see the maps, the tiny bedroom, the table where the vote almost happened. It's empty now, quiet, a museum. But if you stand there long enough, you can almost hear it. The voice that saved the world. Churchill once said, "History will be kind to me, for I intend to write it." He did write it. 6 volumes on World War II. Won the Nobel Prize for Literature. But history isn't finished with Churchill yet. Every generation has to decide. Was he hero or villain? Savior or war criminal? Maybe he was both. Maybe that's the point. History doesn't give us perfect heroes. It gives us flawed humans in impossible situations. And sometimes, just sometimes, those flawed humans are exactly what the moment needs. May 28th, 1940. That cabinet war room, that speech. Democracy was 3 hours from death. One man's words saved it. Not because he was perfect, but because he refused to surrender. The world we live in today exists because of what happened in that room. Because words, spoken at the right moment, can be more powerful than armies. Churchill believed he was walking with destiny. Maybe he was right. This is the War Maestro Chronicles, May 28th, 1940. 3 hours to save democracy. Churchill almost lost. History is full of moments this impossible, where one decision, one person, one refusal to quit changed everything. That's what we do here. Subscribe for more.